What's going on, you wolves out there? It's the Wolf Craze here to review the 11th major installment in the Assassin's Creed series. That's right, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. The following comments are intended to point out improvements made from Origins to Odyssey, but this is not to say that I'm actually comparing the two. They are both created on the same engine, which is the Anvil Next 2.0 engine. So improvements discussed are really only based on the amount of time spent on creating the game, and details that received more attention in Odyssey than in Origins. I'm going to be covering a few categories: aesthetics, mechanics, and RPG elements, as well as weapons and armor. And then I'm going to close with some final opinions on my feelings towards the game in a general sense. When referring to the aesthetics of the game, the detail to the character models has improved, but I would say only slightly. The still shots that you can take in photo mode look really nice and provide a realistic feel to the game, but this is only noticeable really in the photo mode. During in-game cutscenes, which are clearly different from the cinematics, the detail of the character models together with facial animations makes the characters appear choppy. So what originally looked more realistic now looks clearly animated and not as fluid. This takes away from the realism that the extra detail to the character models was trying to provide. But aside from that, the clothing detail that we see throughout the entire gameplay of the character models of your protagonist, your antagonist, and the NPCs, they haven't really improved, but they still remain fairly impressive. Animations also appear to have remained the same, such as the running animations, standing animations, and limping animations, so on and so forth. If you go back to Origins and look, the animations that you see Bayek engage in, those are the same kind of animations that you will see Alexios or Cassandra engage in. Furthermore, detail to landscape and atmosphere has improved, and I may be a bit biased, primarily because I prefer the Greek environment than I do the Egyptian environment. The Egyptian environment is, well, it's incredibly desert-like, so there's not a lot of variety and variation in what you're actually seeing. So there is a lot of vegetation, all of which respond nicely to weather systems, such as the wind. There's a greater variety to the terrain, more cliffs and water passageways, and the detail to stone and sand is improved with greater visual depth and lighting. This gives the appearance of a more natural and realistic look when quickly traversing open landscape or while walking through town. Villages, towns, and cities are highly populated but not too dense, unlike the Unity, Assassin's Creed Unity game. Buildings are unique and true to the time period, which is typical and standard for most Assassin's Creed games. The ambiance is detailed as well. The player will hear insects, farm animals, domestic animals, and NPCs simultaneously, but it's not unnatural. It's done in a natural, artful, and purposeful way, so it's not sounding like a lot of background noise. Of course, the type of noise and ambiance that you experience is dependent on where you are at any point in the game. Regardless, there's always something occurring in the player's space, which lends itself nicely to creating a living, breathing world. The shadows of the vegetation are dense in some areas and are not as smooth as one might expect. So when you're running through thick vegetation, you might not notice, but looking at it from a standstill perspective, you will notice an unnatural darkness to the shadow and some aliasing. So the shadows are not as smooth, they're a little bit more rigid, angular than you might expect. Furthermore, there are a variety of animals with which the player can interact. There are bears, moose, dogs, chickens, sharks, whales, and other creatures native to ancient Greece, and we've seen this since Assassin's Creed 3, where you were able to finally begin hunting, and that has continued for the most part since Assassin's Creed 3. I also want to note that the lighting has not improved from Origins. However, that's not to say that they're bad. I really love the lighting in Assassin's Creed Origins, and Odyssey continues to not disappoint. The god rays are clean, natural, and tasteful, and the light refraction is as natural as it can be. On to the mechanics of the game. Navigation is similar to its predecessor and any other game that included naval transport, but somehow that's still kind of lacking. So there are multiple ways for the player to traverse the world. This includes walking, running, riding a horse, swimming, steering a shallow water boat, and navigating a naval ship, and also the typical fast travel if you have reached all the synchronization points. Most forms of travel are easy and accessible, but the primary means of traveling that most players will enjoy, such as navigating the war vessel, is made more difficult than in the previous games that included naval transport. If you want to have continuous access to your naval vessel, you either have to steer it to your destination, which can take a very long time considering the size of the map, or you can summon it at ship docks, which I feel there are not enough of or are not in the best locations. On that note, however, the developers did something unique with the water traversal mechanic. Some vessels are equipped to handle open water, whereas others are not. For instance, if you were to take a shallow water boat into the open sea, it will gradually take damage and fall apart. You're made aware of this as you'll notice the sails slowly deteriorating and the vessel itself is taking damage. Should your boat fall apart in the middle of the sea, you are left to swim the remainder of the way to your destination or to simply reach dry land. And unlike Origins, there will not be any helpful citizens to pull you out of the water and provide you temporary control of their boat to reach dry land. Furthermore, the battle systems in Assassin's Creed Odyssey is not significantly improved. It's still very similar to previous games such as Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag and any other Assassin's Creed that included naval combat. It's just done in its own unique way. As in ancient Greece, they didn't have guns, they had arrows and spears. So the commands to fire on other boats just really includes those weapons and not much else. You can still board ships of enemy vessels and take out those ships, and you also have the opportunity to knock a few people out and try to get them to come join you and your crew on your own ship. So there's not much more added to naval combat, and it's still very much the same. Speaking of fighting enemies has become more challenging, encouraging the player to initially use the stealth mechanic to take down as many enemies as possible before being spotted or fighting outright. So unlike Origins, the leveling system in Odyssey does not provide the player reprieve from challenging foes when returning to previously visited locations. So regardless of the level you are at, enemies will always remain within 2 levels of your current level. For example, if you're a level 10, your enemies will typically be no lower than a level 8. On a rare occasion, I personally have fought enemies who are level 7 while I'm at a level 10. And this kind of makes you question the purpose of the whole leveling system to begin with, if it is not to make fighting enemies in previously visited locations easier. Furthermore, there is no blocking in Odyssey. Rather, the player is given a parry mechanic which any Assassin's Creed fan will be familiar with. Again, this makes fighting outright less preferable when it can be avoided. However, the fighting feels smooth, much like Origins did. The player is also given special moves that they can hotkey and use during combat, including everyone's favorite Spartan kick. The ability to hotkey various moves adds depth to each fight, allowing the player to strategize how they will attack certain enemies. And they continue the trend of having various forms of enemies, from like brutes to basic warriors to commanders and lieutenants, all of varying level of difficulty. The RPG elements attributed with Assassin's Creed Odyssey include the following. You can select from one of 2 characters, Alexios or Cassandra. Players can play 2 different storylines, one of a male and female protagonist, offering players a lot of replayability. Leveling your character up is a carryover from Origins, and this can still be accomplished by completing missions, main or side, reaching certain points on the map, and completing side quests. With each level up, you are given an ability point to spend on your skills tree, which again is another carryover from Origins. The skills tree continues to include 3 various branches on which the player can develop their character. A hunter, which focuses heavily on the archer playstyle, the warrior, which focuses on combat playstyle, and assassin, which focuses on the stealth playstyle. Each ability unlocked can be upgraded a set number of times to improve the effects of the abilities. So the abilities that you obtain through these ability points that enhance your character can be enhanced even further. Unlike its predecessor, Odyssey now gives the player a literal choice in how they want their character to respond during cutscenes. The choices made by the player have a direct impact on the world around them. The effects may be immediate, so you actually might see the consequences of your actions almost instantaneously following your choice, or it could be felt later on in the story. Interesting point though, there doesn't seem to be much to do with the romantic relationships that you can develop. If you have a romantic relationship outright, and that is the choice that you have made for your particular character, it doesn't seem to have any carryover effect later on in the story. If anything, you can bring them onto your crew, but then have no further dialogue with that character, and you'll probably never see them again. So the romantic relationship concept seems to have fallen flat and doesn't really have any significant impact on the story overall. Note, although not quite an RPG element, the battle between Spartans and Athenians is kind of reminiscent of Syndicate, such that there is a gang war tension between the opposing forces. You can choose who to side with and work for, but you're not stringently committed to one force or the other, so you can kill both Athenians and Spartans depending on how you want your story to turn out. Weapons and armor. Okay, weapons and armor are categorized as other RPGs: common, uncommon, rare, legendary, and exotic. And with each degree of rarity, they're given a distinguishable color and come with traits specific to that armor. Odyssey enhances the leveling mechanic of weapons and armor through perks called engravings, and these engravings are a unique feature that allow the player to enhance the stats of a favored weapon or piece of armor. Engravings add additional stats on top of the existing stats specific to that item, so it's stats upon stats. Much like in Origins, weapons and armor can be dismantled so they're upgraded, and you're given a variety of weapons from balanced, powerful, quick, short range, and long range to please any kind of play style. Overall, I feel that Odyssey is an improved version of Origins, but it still has its issues in terms of dialogue, voice acting, and the effects of the decisions that you make and how that has an impact on the remainder of your story. Overall, I feel that Odyssey is an improved version of Origins. This is to be expected as they were developed almost simultaneously and with the same engine. Thus far, the story is detailed and riveting. As Alexios, you as the player know very little about him, and along with Alexios, you learn more about his backstory and overall purpose in the overarching story plot of Assassin's Creed franchise. I have heard other reviews of Alexios, and many people don't like Alexios and prefer to have Cassandra because the voice acting for Alexios seems pretty bland and not interesting, and also some of the characters that he runs into, their voice acting too is not as great, and their lines are pretty bland. However, I find that his story is pretty interesting thus far, and he really doesn't know much about himself or his family, which is quite interesting. Although I have not played as Cassandra yet, I can reasonably assume that her story is just as important, and I'm a bit biased when I say that I prefer Odyssey over Origins because Egypt was not a preferred location of mine. I had mentioned this earlier, that Egypt was just kind of a bland desert. I mean, that is what Egypt pretty much is, and there were some towns that had some vegetation, forestation, but it wasn't enough, and it didn't feed my color palette that I was desiring. However, I cannot contest that Origins was incredibly well done and a game that withstood and did very well during a critical change of the franchise. There is no doubt that Origins will be remembered for the groundbreaking gameplay change from action-adventure to RPG, but Odyssey took what was done with Origins and improved on it. So, that being said, those are my overall opinions of the 11th installment in the Assassin's Creed series, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Please do remember that these are opinions of my own, and if you're interested in sharing your own opinions and comments based on your experience in playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey thus far, please share those in the comments below. And that's it for now, and until next time, peace out.